When most people think of childhood trauma, they picture events that actually occurred, the shouting matches they can still recall, the moments that left visible scars, the incidents they can point to and say, "That's where something inside me broke." But there exists a completely different kind of wound that operates in the opposite way. It isn't shaped by what happened, it's shaped by what never did. Nobody held you when you cried and couldn't understand why. Nobody asked what you were feeling and genuinely waited for your response. Nobody reflected your emotions back to you so you could learn to see them as real. The absence of those things doesn't leave a visible mark, it leaves something far harder to locate and even harder to put into words. And the children who grow up surrounded by that absence usually have no idea anything is missing, they simply adapt. They develop habits that appear from the outside, like strengths, like maturity, like admirable self-reliance, and they carry those habits into adulthood, never realizing what they truly are, survival strategies built by a child who had to learn how to need less. Today, I want to walk you through what some of those habits actually look like, not to make you feel damaged, but because recognizing where they came from is the first genuine step toward finally being able to release them. The first habit: you never ask for help. The world calls this self-sufficiency and rewards you for it. You're the one who figures things out on your own, the one who handles a personal crisis without reaching out to anyone, the one who would never dream of admitting out loud that you can't manage something by yourself. From the outside, this looks like strength. From the inside, it's something else entirely. When a child reaches out repeatedly and is met with indifference, distraction, or irritation instead of a response, the brain quietly makes a calculation below the level of conscious awareness. The calculation sounds like this: asking for help leads to rejection, so I must become my own source of everything. This isn't self-sufficiency, this is a fortress constructed around a very specific wound, the wound of having needed something and being left to need it alone. As an adult, when you refuse help, you're not simply being capable, you're shielding yourself from the particular pain of having a need and watching it go completely unmet. The fortress keeps you safe, but it also keeps everyone out, and the loneliness trapped inside it is something your independence, no matter how real or impressive, cannot heal. The second habit: you don't know what you're feeling. Someone asks how you feel about something and your mind goes completely blank, not because you're being evasive, not because you're hiding anything, but because you genuinely have no idea. In psychology, this is known as alexithymia, a disconnect between your body's emotional signals and your conscious recognition of them. Here's how it takes root. In a healthy childhood, parents serve as emotional mirrors. When a child cries, a parent says something like, "You're feeling frustrated because that didn't go the way you wanted." That single sentence does something invisible yet essential. It links the physical sensation the child is experiencing to a word, a label, something that can be named and therefore understood and processed. In a home where emotions were ignored or treated as an inconvenience, that mirroring never takes place. The child's feelings exist, but they go unnamed, unacknowledged, purposeless, so the child learns to disconnect, to silence their inner world because feeling it produces nothing. As an adult, this becomes a life lived at a slight distance from yourself. You watch other people seem deeply connected to their passions and their pain, and you wonder what that feels like from the inside. You're not cold. You're not shallow. You simply had the wires between sensation and language quietly cut before you were old enough to know they were supposed to be connected. The third habit: you over-explain everything. You were 5 minutes late and you deliver a 3-minute account of exactly why. You bought a particular item, and you justify the choice to someone who never asked. You make a decision and immediately construct a case for why it was the logical and defensible one. From the outside, this looks like conscientiousness. From the inside, it's something much older than that. When a child grows up in a setting where their needs and preferences weren't inherently respected, they learn that having a want requires justification, that making a mistake demands a defense, that existing without a fully articulated explanation for every choice invites dismissal or criticism. So, you learn to pre-defend yourself to build the argument before anyone asks, to make sure your choices are bulletproof before anyone gets the chance to question them. You're not explaining yourself to the person standing in front of you. You're explaining yourself to a ghost from your past parent who never gave you the basic permission to simply be, to choose, to exist without having to earn that existence through logic. The fourth habit: you apologize for taking up space. You apologize when someone bumps into you. You apologize for asking a question in a meeting. You apologize for your home being slightly imperfect before a guest has even walked through the door. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for things that aren't your fault. For things that aren't mistakes at all. For the simple act of being in a room and occasionally needing something from it. This isn't politeness, this is what happens when a child internalizes, deep below conscious awareness, that their very presence is a burden. If you grew up with parents who were perpetually exhausted or disengaged or simply uninterested, you learned to shrink. You learned that the safest way to exist was to require as little space as possible, to be low maintenance, to never cost anyone anything they weren't already freely offering. Every apology is a small version of the same sentence. I'm sorry for needing anything. I'm sorry for being here. It is the voice of a child who was taught, without a single explicit lesson, that their needs came second to the comfort of the adults around them. Pause here for a moment because something needs to be said before we continue. If you're recognizing yourself in these habits, I want to be very clear about something. There is nothing wrong with you, there never was. Your brain did exactly what it was designed to do. It assessed the environment it was in and it adapted. It built strategies to keep you as safe and as functional as possible in a situation that was demanding too much from a child who had no other options. These habits were not character flaws, they were survival tools. And they worked, they got you here. But they were built for a world that no longer exists. And the weight of carrying them into a life where you are no longer that child is starting to cost you things you deserve to have. Stay with me. The fifth habit: you become a different person depending on who you're with. You're remarkably skilled at reading a room. You can detect a shift in someone's mood before they've even noticed it themselves. You adjust your tone, your opinions, your personality, the entire presentation of yourself to match whoever you're around. From the outside, this looks like social intelligence in reality. For someone who grew up with emotional neglect, this is hypervigilance disguised as charm. When a child's home doesn't provide a stable emotional baseline, the child becomes an expert at monitoring the adults around them, not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. They needed to know what mood the room was in before they could determine whether it was safe, whether this was a moment they could ask for something, whether the ground was stable enough to stand on. You became a mirror because having a solid sense of self was not an option that felt safe. And now, as an adult, you move through the world incredibly skilled at reflecting other people back to themselves. But in the quiet moments alone, a question surfaces. Who am I? When no one is watching. The fact that this question is difficult to answer isn't a mystery, it's the direct result of never having your own traits and emotions reflected back to you during the years when identity was being formed. The sixth habit: you cannot trust your own judgment. Did I say the wrong thing in that conversation? Do my friends actually like me, or are they just tolerating me? Was that decision the right one, or am I missing something obvious? The second guessing never fully stops, not for small things, not for large ones. This is what happens when a child's reality is consistently denied by the people who are supposed to confirm it. When you said, "I'm sad," and heard, "No, you're not, you're just tired," When you expressed something and it was dismissed or ignored or explained away. You learned that your internal compass was unreliable, that the signals you were receiving from inside yourself could not be trusted. And you started looking outside yourself for confirmation that what you were perceiving was real. That pattern doesn't vanish when childhood ends, it follows you into every decision, every relationship, every moment where you need to trust what you know and feel. The chronic self-doubt is not a personality trait. It is the absence of the one thing a child needs most to develop confidence. A parent who consistently said, "Yes, I see what you see. I believe what you feel. Your inner world is real." The seventh habit, you are everyone's support system. But you disappear when you need help. You're the one people call the therapist friend. The reliable one. The person who shows up. Who listens. Who helps carry what others cannot carry alone. And when you're in crisis, you vanish. You don't call anyone. You handle it alone or you don't handle it at all. But either way, you do it without reaching toward another person. This isn't because you're stoic, it's because somewhere in your childhood, you discovered that the only way to receive a positive response from the people who were supposed to care for you was to be useful. Maybe you took care of others in your family. Maybe you became the emotional anchor for a parent who needed you to fill that role. Maybe you simply noticed that being helpful produced warmth while being needy produced withdrawal, and you internalized the lesson. Your worth lives in what you do for people, not in who you are. This creates a life that looks from the outside like remarkable generosity and feels from the inside like a debt you can never stop paying, because receiving care doesn't feel like love. It feels like a trap. You wait for what's expected in return. You tell yourself you don't deserve it. You find reasons to give it back or deflect it entirely. And you remain in the middle of all your relationships, fundamentally alone. Hyper-independence that is really a fortress against being let down. Emotional numbness that developed when feelings produced no response. Over-explaining born from never being allowed to simply be. Constant apology for the crime of existing. A self that shifts to match every room because having a fixed self felt dangerous. Distrust of your own judgment because the people who should have confirmed it consistently denied it. A life of giving that cannot receive because receiving was never safe. These are not personality flaws, they are not things that are wrong with you. They are the completely predictable adaptations of a child who needed more than they were given and found ways to survive anyway. But the environment that created them no longer exists. And the survival gear you've been wearing for decades is starting to cost you the very things you've always wanted most. Real connection. The ability to be seen in your wholeness. The freedom to have needs without shame. Healing from this doesn't begin with a dramatic transformation. It begins with almost invisible steps, saying, "I'd prefer the Italian place," instead of, "I don't care, you pick." Waiting 5 seconds before saying sorry for something that wasn't your fault. Letting someone help you carry something even when you could manage it alone. These habits were armor, and that armor kept you safe when you were too young to have any other option. You are allowed to thank it for that. You are allowed to set it down now. You are allowed to be seen, to be heard, to have needs that the people who love you will not experience as burdens. They will experience them as a chance to love you the way you deserve to be loved from the very beginning. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were a child who deserved to be noticed. And you still do. Which of these habits felt closest to your own experience? Share it in the comments, because naming it isn't weakness. It is the first real act of seeing yourself the way someone should have seen you a long time ago. And if someone in your life carries this weight without knowing where it came from, send this to them, because understanding it changes everything.